You're joining me inside one of the best cars launched in 2024 in my book. And there have been some pretty impressive launches done this year, but this one might just take the cake, even though it's an electric car, even though it's a small car, even though the energy consumption does seem to be a bit too high. But it has so much personality and it's so fun to drive and it's so enjoyable that in my book, this might just be the best car of 2024. And I'm talking, of course, about the Renault 5, the car we're driving today. And unfortunately, if you've been watching my videos, you probably know that I tend to present them from the outside for the first part of the video at least. But unfortunately today, the weather is absolutely crap and I just couldn't do that because it's raining way too much. I'm not trying to ruin my gear, and it was rather impossible to find some place that was covered and well lit to allow me to present this car to you. So I'm gonna have to do all of this entire video from behind the wheel. So what is this car we're driving? As I said, this is the Renault 5 E-Tech. So it's a modern reinterpretation of a legendary car launched by Renault back in 1972. Yes, 1972. The Renault 5 was a bestseller until 1984 when it went out of production. I'm talking about the first generation, of course. And that means the Renault 5 was sold in 5.5 million units in its first generation. The second generation was also in production from 1984 to 1996. So a rather long span as well for a production car. And it was the era where a lot of super minis were born because people just needed small cars to be driving around in them around town that were very easy to use, very inexpensive, very accessible, and had very low running costs. And the Renault 5, as well as the Mini, as well as the Fiat 500, all of them applied this recipe beautifully. And from the get-go, the Renault 5 had some very interesting choices under the hood. Of course, they weren't extremely powerful, with the exception of the Renault 5 Turbo, which had a 1.4-liter turbocharged engine under the hood. Yes, with over 100 horsepower, the car was incredibly light, and it became a sort of legend among car enthusiasts because the Renault 5 was a small car and it was known mainly for its lack of, luxurious features. It was known to be a poor man's car, let's put it this way, right? But sometimes a Renault 5 with a turbocharger would take people by surprise because nobody would expect it to be that fast. And it was so popular that its shape became rather iconic, and Renault decided to bring it back to life. As a matter of fact, the story of the two cars, the original and the modern version, are very close intertwined because the original Renault 5 was the brainchild of an engineer that basically had too much spare time on its hands. And he created a car in his shed, as it happened a lot in those times at a number of car manufacturers. So he basically created it in his shed in his spare time. He showed it to the management, and the management said, you know what, we're gonna put it in production. It used a number of parts from other cars in Renault's range, as it was done back then as well, and that is it is done today as well. So that's what brought the original Renault 5 to life. It's almost the same story with this generation because according to Renault, this car was born from a design created by one of their designers under Renault's design team in his spare time. He just showed it to the new CEO, to Luca De Meo, when he came to Renault in 2020. And the new CEO, Luca De Meo, by the way, if you didn't know, used to work for Fiat, and he's the one responsible for the 500 being brought back. He's a fan of the Super Mini. He saw the design and he said, you know what, we do need a retro future car like this. And the team was given 3 years to create this production model. Gilles Vidal came to Renault and they managed to create a cohesive design for this car, and they put it in production. So it's quite fascinating how the passion of some people in the industry can lead to such great projects. And I have to say, the design of this car does work in its favor, and I think it's going to be one of the main selling points of the Renault 5, because it just looks so damn good. And the technology today allowed the people from Renault to include some of the design cues that the original was supposed to have, but it wasn't possible back then. Now, when the original Renault 5 design was created, its original designer, who by the way died a few years after it finished the design of the car, he wanted the lights on the back to go from the bumper all the way up to the C-pillar. That wasn't really doable back then with the technology Renault had, but today we do have a huge stoplight at the back that does bring back some of his desires from back when he initially penned the original. But up front, I love the design of this car. It looks so good. The headlamps are almost squarish like the original. They have some squares inside. They are LED powered, so they do have LEDs on all all the models in the range. I love the fog lights with the LEDs also with the square design, and they transform into signals whenever you use your turn signal. I love the way that the car was shaped. It's bulky, it's short, it's stocky, if you will. It looks absolutely brilliant in my book. I also like the fact that you can get some stickers for the front doors with different designs. I love the fact that we have 18-inch wheels as standard, and that's the only size you can get, and they do fill up the arches, the wheel arches of the car. The car has very short overhangs, so that means it will look very aggressive, and it's very compact. I mean, it is a bit bigger than the original. It's about 30 centimeters longer, but by today's standard, it is a super mini. It's a B segment car, it's a city car, if you will, being 3 meters 92 total in length, so under 4 meters. It's basically, if you want to put it into context, it's basically a Renault Clio. So it's shorter than a Clio by 2 centimeters, but it is taller by 6 centimeters. But you wouldn't tell because it has such a great design. Overall, it has powerful colors included in standard like pop yellow or pop green. They look absolutely brilliant, and you can get a contrasting roof for it. So I'm all for this design. I love this retro design that has been brought back to life in a modern fashion with a modern drivetrain. And I think more manufacturers should do cars like this. I'm thinking about the Capri, for example. I actually missed out on the international press drives for this car because I had accepted beforehand to drive to Marseille to test the new Ford Capri. And while I understand that SUVs are all the hype today, if they had done a sports car with the design of the original Capri and with the electric drivetrain that today's industry demands, I think it would have been a greater success than the Capri is today. So I actually like the interior as well, because like the original, a lot of the choices Renault made are eco-conscious. So for example, all the textile materials inside come from recycled PET bottles. We do have synthetic leather over here on the dashboard on this iconic model. You don't get this on other versions of the car when you configure it. We do have this Renault 5 light over here in front of the passenger that I absolutely love, but this only comes on the top spec car. So there are some limitations. I love this roof, this upholstery. It's textile, it feels decent enough to the touch, and I love the fact that this is not just a flat upholstery for the roof line, right? So there are some areas where the plastic is a bit cheaper. For example, on the top of the door cards, on the top of the dashboard, you do have cheaper plastic, also sourced from recycled plastics. But I don't think that's a big issue. You don't really have contact with this area, at least a lot. And on the door cards, you do have this textile finish, The armrest is made out of soft touch plastic, so it's quite okay overall, because let's not forget, this is not an expensive car. This is a very affordable electric car. We're going to talk about this later on. And I also like the way they did the dashboard. There are some familiar elements over here on the climate control panel, for example, but I do like the shape of the air vents with these rounded rectangular shapes, right? Like the ones you see in the bumper, and they are a nod to the original. I love the seats, incredibly comfortable, done in this textile finish that's once again sourced from recycled PETs. So there's a lot going on in here. Now, in terms of technology, excluding the base version, every single one will get this instrument cluster that has a 10-inch diagonal. The same goes for the infotainment screen. It's basically the same system you will find in the Renault Megane, the Renault Scenic, right? It uses the Android backend, and because of space restrictions, you cannot get the full 14-inch display you would get in a Scenic or a Megane today. But I think this is enough for most use cases. It works flawlessly, and you do have ambient light, and you can configure it depending on your mood or the time of the day. You can change the color depending on the time of the day. And if there's one bit of technology that I can totally recommend, is the Harman Kardon sound system. It's absolutely brilliant. I would totally recommend getting it. So the graphics are brilliant, the car drives brilliant. I'm on the highway right now, and I think it's very well sound insulated. You might perceive the sound a bit noisier than it would normally be because, as I said, it's raining really hard. There's a lot of rain noise in the cabin, but the cabin overall, I think, is very, very quiet overall. And let's talk about the technical side of things. So the Renault 5 is built on the Ampere platform, or the CMF BEV platform, if you will, but they call it Ampere now. So it's a modular electric platform you will find on every single electric car from Renault today. It's a 400 volt platform, so the charging performance won't be brilliant, but it's good enough for this car, because let's not forget, this was created to be a city car first and foremost, and everything about it reflects that. Renault made the choices in order to reflect that this is mainly an urban car, right? So I'm testing it on the highway just because I can, but that doesn't mean this is necessarily a car meant for longer road trips. On the technical side of things, there will be 3 levels of power available. For now, you can only get 2 of them. So there's a 120 horsepower, 225 Newton meters of torque version, and there's a 150 horsepower, 245 Newton meters of torque version. Both of them are front wheel drive. Later down the line, we will get a entry-level version with 95 horsepower. In terms of battery sizes, the 120 horsepower version can be had with a 40 kilowatt battery, 40 kilowatt hour battery, whereas the 150 horsepower version can be had with a 52 kilowatt hour battery. So pretty small, but within the size that you would see on electric super minis in this segment. Now, depending on the one you get, the charging power will be different. All cars get 11 kilowatt chargers as standard. So that means, for example, in the case of the 40 kilowatt hour battery, it would take about 4 hours to recharge it. For the 50 kilowatt hour battery, it would get a 5-hour charging time, 4.5. But when it comes to fast charging, the 40 kilowatt hour battery will be limited to 80 kilowatts of maximum charging power, whereas the 52 kilowatt hour battery can get up to 100 kilowatts of charging power. So pretty good overall. That means no matter what configuration you go for, a 10 to 80% charge shouldn't take more than 30 minutes if the battery is within the perfect operating temperatures. Because right now, when I'm doing this test, this range test with the car, well, the exterior temperature never went up 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. Last night it was even colder. It was raining all the time, so the battery temperature will be pretty low, and that will have an impact on the energy consumption and the range you're getting. Officially, the 40 kilowatt hour battery should give you a 300 kilometer range, whereas this one we're testing today, the 52 kilowatt hour battery, should give you a range of about 400 kilometers WLTP. Well, that's in ideal conditions. It's not true right now when it's rainy and cold and it's winter time. To be more precise, I tested this car. So this is the 150 horsepower, 52 kilowatt hour battery, right? Iconic package. This is the top of the line, the most expensive version you can get. I tested it. Around town I saw an average of 23 to 24 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered, but that was like in the worst conditions ever, cold, rainy, and in holiday traffic, because everybody's crazy going out to get gifts and so on. So the average speed was 14 kilometers an hour, right? So that's the worst case scenario. And that should give you about a 200 kilometer range. In these conditions, on a series of B roads, having some fun with the car, I saw an average of 18 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered. That should get you really close to 300 kilometers of range. Whereas on the highway, as we're driving right now, I'm seeing 26 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered. So probably about 150, 160 kilometers of range with a full battery charge. So as I said, this is not necessarily a car meant to be taken on the highway. So you might rightfully so ask, then what is this car for? This is a very fun car to drive. Of course, not in these conditions, because you will lose traction under heavy acceleration, but it is a supremely comfortable and incredibly fun car to drive. If you have dry tarmac, I am absolutely certain that you will have a blast behind the wheel of this car. It's not eye-watering fast. It will do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 8 seconds, for example. That's not slow, but compared to what we've seen on a lot of modern day electric cars, it does seem so. It's not slow, it's quite zippy off the line. It's compact, so you will be able to throw it around bends very easily. It will be fun to drive. It has multi-link suspension on the rear axle, which means it's not only going to be comfortable, but if you push it into a corner, the car will be more balanced and will not lose contact with the ground, with the asphalt, if you want to push it really hard, right? So it's going to stay composed at higher speeds. The dampers are perfect. There's no sound, weird noises coming from under the car whenever you hit potholes and so on. So it's going to be a perfect experience if you want to drive it in a, I don't know, fun manner. But I think its biggest selling point will, at the end of the day, be its design, its interior. It's special, it feels nice to the touch, it feels great when you're driving it. It just makes you feel really nice. And I think that's going to be its main selling point, alongside with the pricing. Now, if we're talking about rivals, right? So let's talk about what kind of cars this model is going up against. So we're talking about super minis, electric ones, of course. And I think the biggest rival this car will have will be the Mini Cooper SE. That's a bit more powerful, but and it's a bit more expensive, but in terms of specs and sizes, they are quite similar. Then there's the Opel Corsa E, or the Vauxhall Corsa E. Then there's the Peugeot 208, the electric version E208, for example, and that's about it. We're still waiting for Volkswagen to bring its own rival in the segment. They were talking about the Volkswagen ID2, but there's been like zero talk about it in recent years. So at the moment, I think I might just pick this car over the Mini. I didn't get to drive the Mini yet, but I love this design a lot more. I mean, it's not going to be the most practical car. It's a small car, right? So sitting in the back for people my size will be a challenge. But if you're under 6 feet tall and under 250 pounds like I am, you might just fit in the back. Also, the trunk is 328 liters, which is pretty good. It's close to what a internal combustion car would offer in the same segment, so it's not bad at all. But I think personally that the design of this car will be its best seller. Pricing, well, it will depend on the market you're in. Over here in Romania, pricing starts at just under 27,000 euros for the 40 kilowatt 120 horsepower version. The most expensive one you can get is this one, iconic 150 horsepower and the big battery with the Harman Kardon sound system and the optional pop yellow color, 34,700 euros. We do have a government rebate for electric cars over here, so you could pick this up for under 30,000 euros, which I think it's a pretty good deal. Of course, there will be the 95 horsepower version launched in the future. We're hearing talk about its launch price being close to 25,000 euros, and that with the government rebate would take it down to under 20,000 euros as a purchase price, which in my book, once again, is pretty good. But I think we could do better. I mean, if this car would have a starting price of 15,000 euros, you would see them everywhere. People would stop complaining about the charging infrastructure or anything. They would just buy it. And I am very tempted to buy one myself, but not right now. We're gonna have to wait and see how this behaves in better weather, because right now the range is kind of inducing some anxiety. Especially to some people. Not to me, but to some people I think it's going to be an issue. I would definitely like to know what you guys think about it. Overall, I think it's a very fun and very good looking car, and I think Renault has done a great job. They had a great year, 2024. They launched a lot of great cars. The Rafale, this one, the Symbioz, I think that's a very good car to take a look at. And I think they are definitely on the right path. But let me know what you guys think, and until next time, of course, don't forget to feed your passions. Ciao.